Okay, welcome to Church History. Welcome to session 16, to Witches, Fat Slumbers and Awakenings. We're going to look at Europe and see the witch hunts. We're going to talk a little bit about art, Catholic or Protestant. Can you spot the difference? Actually, I'm not going to talk about that. It's in the notes. But have a look at it. We're going to look at William and Mary. And the keeping of oaths, and we're going to get as far as the awakening and the arrival of Methodism. But let's start off. I'm looking at page 29 of 39 in the way in which my notes are worked out of chapter 16, the beginning of chapter 16. And we're looking at witch hunts. Where on earth did this nonsense come from? So, bizarrely, my notes read, misuse of magic has been illegal since early Roman times. What do you mean, misuse of magic? This isn't Harry Potter. What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. It was rare for proper trials prior to the 15th century. In Mortimer's book, I made mention of an episode ago or two, Time Traveller's Guide to Elizabethan England. He argues that we would have considered witchcraft to be quite normal. A sort of soothsayer, local healer type of person. So we wouldn't have particularly considered it to be a big deal. Both Protestants and Catholics got into it. Diarmaid MacCulloch, in his really big fat book, he talks about how something in the region of 40 to 50,000 in Europe and North America died on witchcraft charges. Curiously, Lutheranism and the Spanish Inquisition didn't really get into it. And join in with this witch hunt. But it's in the 16th century that this seems to really take off. And we don't really know what caused it, and we don't really know what brought these things about. Some speak of illness and of mass hysteria among the peasants, others in terms of a response to a disaster. But this seems to have happened even when there was no trouble to be needing blaming. 26,000 in Germany, but only 4 in Ireland. So it's not very plain and simple and straightforward. It's not used to persecute other confessions. So the Roman Catholics don't think to themselves, "Ha, this is a good way of getting at Protestants." And vice versa. That's not what it seems to have been about. MacCulloch considers it to be more of a local affair. It's less likely to be a gnarled old woman and more likely to be an annoying but prosperous member of the community, perhaps lacking in male protection for a rich widow finding herself vulnerable. That sort of thing. And not always women in Iceland, and 90% of those accused were men. So, a bizarre thing that just seems to happen and then sort of seems to disappear in terms of how much it was used. Let's move on to William and Mary and the non-jurors. That's really where I want to get to. What do you do when you swear allegiance to your king, but then the king gets ousted and you have a new king? Does your previous oath not matter, or does it matter? And what sort of wimp are you then, if that's how you view your oaths? So we come to the Restoration. You've got your James I, Charles I, your Charles II. That's the Restoration. Charles II comes back, and he gives us his BCP. He brings back Christmas. What a great guy. And then he dies. And James II then becomes king. He's evidently pretty Roman Catholic. He's keen on his divine right. Parliament are not happy. And so they invite William of Orange to come over. And we have what's known as the Glorious Revolution. It's called the Glorious Revolution because nobody dies in it. James II, King of England, flees England. And that's sort of seen as an abdication. But he never wrote a letter. He never actually abdicated. William and Mary are invited to be joint monarchs. And what should the church do? When you get a monarch then who isn't fussed about divine right. So you remember earlier we talked about how the importance of a king who has a view that he has a divine right to be king. He needs the church to support him. So the church feels loved. It's got a purpose and a function in life, and that is to support the divine right of kings. And these two need each other. But what happens if you get a king who says, I'm not really fussed. Not really fussed about the divine right? Where does that leave the church? So I think there's a mild amount of dizziness for the church to go, so what do we do? You don't really need us. What are we about? In other settings, that's no bad a thing. But also, what do you do with the oaths that you swore? So today, more than likely, you will swear a vow like this. I, so-and-so, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God. Okay, so that's more than likely the vow that you'll be taking. Now, what do you do if you've said that for James II, but then he does a bunk, and now suddenly you've got William and Mary on the throne, and what do? You've sworn to do this. You've taken this oath for James II, and now you're being asked to take another oath for William and Mary. What do? If vows are important, and if you think that that you're swearing of them it matters at all, then that vow still counts. And it's not. You don't have an ability to say, "Oh, never mind." You don't have that power because he hasn't actually abdicated. And so instead, you get this problem and pressure. What are you to do? So the ones who did not swear obedience to William and Mary, the ones who stuck with their original oath, simply out of, not especially out of loyalty to James II, but out of a sense of loyalty to the oath, the importance of swearing and promising a promise. And they end up being called the non-jurors because they refuse to take the second oath, if you like. Now, Mary dies, William dies, and the throne passes to Anne. Queen Anne, she doesn't really appear much in our history, and I'm sorry because I think that she's rather neglected. But never mind, I'm moving on. And Anne dies, and we come to George I, who bizarrely seems to be the 52nd in line to the throne. You have to wonder what number 50 and 51st would have done if they had been offered it. But they were just deemed to be too Catholic, these others. And so the George I is invited to the throne. After the upsets of the previous century, the Church of England heaved a sigh of relief and went to sleep. And Edward Gibbon talks about the fat slumbers of the church. Now, it's no bad thing if at this moment you should turn your mind to Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of church stuff in her books and in her writings. It's fascinating. There's even a book by a woman called Paula Hollingsworth, no relation, what a shame. And she's written about this in her book. So do have a look that up if that's a curiosity for you. Jane Austen. In her church, she would not have had stained glass windows. She would not have had pews. Possibly a bench. She would not have sung hymns. Although possibly she might have sung some metrical psalms. Okay, so that's what's going on in her world. Now, think. So we're talking Jane Austen. They were 1775 to 1817. So here we now come to George Whitfield and John and Charles Wesley. So worth mentioning their mother, Susanna Wesley, and it's John Wesley that we focus on just to begin with. And there's the story about how the rectory caught on fire. His dad was a vicar. And the rectory caught on fire, and John was 6, and John only escaped by jumping from the window. And his mother thereafter said that he was a brand plucked from the burning. That's a quote from the Bible, from Zechariah 3. John, later on as he grows up and does all his stuff, he was listening to Luther's preface to the Romans when he finds his heart strangely warmed. This is his conversion moment. And he goes from here to preaching in the fields and to gathering large crowds and beginning his groups for study. And they have a method about how they go about this. This is not for worship, this is not for communion, this is for accountability and for charity and for discipleship as they grow together. And so they get this nickname of Methodists. There's some of the emphasis here, but one of the emphasis of Methodism is salvation is for all, not just the elect few. So think Arminian rather than Calvinism. Arminian rather than Calvinism in your thoughts. From the start, the Methodists were open to women as well as men, but they went abroad and they went off to America, and here we have the problem. So in America, in some areas, it's such a vast unexplored country at this stage, and there's plenty of places that have no Anglican presence. There is no priest. How are you to get communion? It's not realistic. Please would you ordain some of these Methodist people to be Anglican priests so that they can take communion to their communities? No, we won't. And so with reluctance, John Wesley, still an Anglican, that's very important. He appoints a couple of others and permits them to ordain others. And so the snowball starts, and so this is really the beginning of the breakaway of Methodism from Anglicanism. And that's not actually, it happens a little later, after the death of Wesley. Now, you've got John, but you've also got Charles. Charles Wesley has this amazing gift for writing hymns, and you've got a list of some of them on page 38 of 39 in my thing, and they are worth having a good look through. And you might surprise yourself and discover actually you know more of them than you thought you did. So there we are, chapter 16, looking at the peculiarity of witchcraft and of the fat slumbers of the Church of England and of the awakenings. And pray God that we may have some more awakenings here ourselves. Next time we're looking at chapter 17, and we're looking at the death of European Christendom. We're going to see if we can go from the Enlightenment as far as the eve of the First World War. I will see you shortly.